When I was in high school, my parents got me a guitar for a Christmas present. Now, when you get a present, there aren't strings attached, right? There aren't rules that say, okay, you've gotten a guitar, but now you have to mow the lawn for 6 months. That's not how a present works. The terms of receiving a gift are, here's a gift, right? Once it's given, you don't add fine print or strings. But they did give me lessons so that I would learn how to play the instrument that had been handed to me. Understanding that difference between guidance for how to use a gift and strings attached for something you have to do to earn a gift you've already been given, well, that's the difference between grace and earning God's favor. And that's exactly where we're headed in this episode of Freed for Love. So we've been taking a look in Paul's letter to the Galatians at this central case Paul has been making, that God's way of relating to us, God's gift of being justified, of sort of being in right relationship, is in fact a gift we haven't earned. And Paul has been trying to say that's always been the case, right? That God doesn't say for generations and generations, you're in right relationship with me because you have followed the rules well enough, and then when Jesus comes, God throws the rules out the window and says, now it's grace. Paul has been saying all along, God's way of relating to us has been through the economy of grace, through the nature of gifts, promises, and trust. We saw last time how Paul went back to that quintessential founding figure of ancient Israel, Abraham, and sort of said, well, how's Abraham in relationship with God? And the storytelling says Abraham trusted God when God made a promise. And as Genesis 15 says it, God reckoned it to him as righteousness. In other words, Abraham doesn't earn God's favor by being a good rule follower. He trusts a promise that God makes, even with wobbly faith, since Abraham from time to time seems awfully shaky in his trust in God. So Paul has made the point that even founding father of ancient Israel, Abraham, is in right relationship with God because God chooses to accept trust rather than God requiring rule following or ritual performance. So now Paul continues on to say in the second half of chapter 3, it says, you know, in a relationship, in daily life, if somebody gives you something with a promise, he gives the example of a will, right? If somebody bequeaths you something in a will, once it's finalized, once it's, notarized and sent to court, you don't get to change it, right? If somebody gives you something as a gift, it's yours, and they don't add on other fine print or other catches to it later. Same thing with getting, say, a guitar for a Christmas present. If it's handed to you as a gift, you open it on Christmas morning, nobody says a week later, oh, by the way, you now also have to do this list of chores in order to keep the thing you've been given. A gift is a gift. However, somebody might say give you a gift and then give you instructions for how to make sense of or how to use that gift. This is kind of how Paul thinks about what eventually comes along in the story of ancient Israel, when God eventually gives commandments, right? That God does give the law and instruction of a whole way of life for ancient Israel to walk in and to learn how to live as God's people. But Paul doesn't see them as a prerequisite, as a precondition. If you follow the rules well enough, then God will give you the gift of salvation or life or the promise. That's a gift. And now here is a way of life. Here are instructions for how to live and make use of the gift you've been given. When I was a high schooler and got guitar lessons, that meant that somebody else had to be my teacher and teach me, oh, this is the E string, and this is how to make an A minor, and here's how to finger pick. All those kinds of things that meant I had to submit to what the teacher's going to tell me so I could learn how to use the gift that had already been given to me. Paul sees the law something like that, right? That God gives a gift that is honestly, sincerely a free gift. No strings, no catches, no fine print. But then God also has given the law as sort of Paul's word is either teacher or disciplinarian. The idea of somebody who would lead or train a child as they grew up so that they would learn, so that they would know, so that when they came of age then, they could make decisions on their own as an adult. Paul doesn't see the law as opposite to grace, Any more than taking guitar lessons is the opposite of receiving guitar as a gift. It becomes a way of using, a means of better understanding the gift that has always been given. But make no mistake, my receiving the gift of a guitar as a high school kid wasn't contingent on if I did well enough at each weekly lesson. The lessons were to enable me to make better use of the gift that had already been given. Getting those in the right order is crucial. That is never about trying to make ourselves good enough to earn something that's already been given, but receiving a promise. So Paul is convinced that the promise made to Abraham is also made to a particular descendant of Abraham, Jesus, the Christ, who's descended from Abraham, and that everybody who's joined to Christ by faith also is an heir of the promise given to Abraham. In other words, Paul's been saying that belonging in the people of God isn't a matter of if you share enough DNA or biology or genetic material with Abraham, but rather if we will dare to trust, even with wobbly faith, the same way Abraham did. It's a pretty powerful move for Paul, and that's what leads him then to say that the law, when God gives it, wasn't a way of getting to decide who's in and who's out. It was like getting guitar lessons for your guitar. It's a gift as well to help you use the gift you've already been given. And because of that, Paul also says, because it's all been a gift, we've been given a new identity. Even we outsiders, even Gentiles, have been welcomed into this new kind of community where in our baptism into Christ, by being joined to Christ's death and resurrection, the old distinctions go away. So Paul can have this really, really powerful conclusion at the end of chapter 3. There's no longer Jew and Greek. There's no longer free and slave. There's no longer male and female, because you're all one in Christ. The old boundaries, the old groups that we used to use to divide ourselves up into categories, Paul says they don't define us any longer. What makes us belong is trusting in Christ, is trusting a promise God has made, and Christ's faithfulness to us, not so much how good or well-behaved we have been. Taking that seriously really changes everything about the Christian faith. And it's no longer me worrying, am I getting the notes right well enough to get to stay in the club, but more trusting a gift has been put in my hands, and then using the gift I've been given in grateful response. That changes everything. That's where we're headed this coming Thursday in our next session of Freed for Love. Join us on Thursdays in person at 1 o'clock here at Community of Christ as we dig deeper into conversation and Bible study through the letter to the Galatians, or you can always catch up with these video summaries as well. See you along the way.